So if you think people are leaving the US just because of cheap rent or nice beaches, you're missing the whole point. And oh, if you think people are leaving the US just because of cheap rent or nice beaches, well, you're missing the whole picture. People aren't just chasing palm trees. They're escaping a system that no longer makes sense. And if you're ever caught yourself saying, man, something feels off about life here, well, this video is going to put words to that feeling and show you why so many people are leaving and why you may want to too. So what's up? I'm Expat D. If you're new to the channel, like, share, subscribe. I think this content might be for you. I didn't make this video to bash the US for views. I made it because I know what it feels like to do everything right. Go to school, get the job, pay the bills, and still feel like the math of your life, well, just doesn't add up. I left the US, started building a life abroad, and the more I talked to other expats, from retirees to remote workers to families, well, the more I realized most of us left for the same real reasons. So in this video, I'm going to break down 7 uncomfortable truths that quietly push people out of the US. And by the end, you'll have a clear idea if staying makes sense. Or for you, if it's time to start your exit plan. So if you're into moving abroad, cost of living, and building a different kind of life, well, hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. Let's look at my first point. The math just isn't mathing anymore. Let's start with the obvious one. Let's talk about money. Money, show me the money, right? But not in the cheap, oh, I want a cheaper apartment way. I'm talking about this feeling that you're running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. Every year, you're working harder just to stay in the same place. You got rent, health, insurance, groceries, childcare, student loans. You look at your paycheck and you're like, man, how am I making this much money and still stressed every month? It seemed like it's just never enough. Never enough. So here's the thing. A lot of people who left, they weren't broke. Some had decent salaries, some were homeowners, but they realized something that might be sitting in the back of your head too. The US just wants you to survive. Okay? It needs you to stay in constant hustle mode. You're not rewarded for being responsible. You're rewarded for being in debt and dependent. So when people move abroad and see that their rent drops in half, healthcare is a fraction of the cost, and they're not bleeding out over random fees and surprise bills, well, they realize the problem wasn't them, it was the system. hmm So, and once you see that, it's very hard to unsee it. Look at my next point. You got constant stress and zero peace. So let's keep it real. A lot of people don't leave the US because they hate America. They leave because their nervous system is cooked. Think about your average day. You've got notifications nonstop, political drama 24/7, mass shootings, worrying about healthcare, job security, retirement. You step outside and your body is on high alert by default. Most folks don't even realize how tense they are, until they leave. And, they're sitting in a cafe abroad and they're like, why is my chest not tight? Why am I not rushing? Why don't I feel like this sense of anxiety? People leave the US for peace, not the vacation kind of peace, but the baseline peace, knowing that, your kid can walk to school without having a panic attack, without you having a panic attack. You're not one medical bill away from, wiping out your savings. And you're not constantly in a fight or flight state. That's a real reason many people say things like, I didn't know how stressed out I was until I left. Once you taste that kind of peace, it's very hard to go back. Let's look at my next point. It's the dream and the reality just doesn't match. We're sold something called the American dream. Work hard, be good, get educated, buy the house, raise a family, retire happy. But here's what a lot of people are feeling. The wages didn't keep up with the housing. College degrees turned into debt traps. Retirement keeps you getting pushed further away. So now you've got generations asking, if I follow the script, what do I really get at the end? The real reason people leave isn't just to see the world, it's because they realized I can write a different script somewhere else. Okay, I'm going to say that again. I can write a different script somewhere else. Abroad, the dream might look like a smaller apartment, but more free time, a walkable city instead of an hour commute, a slower community focused culture instead of the grind till you collapse. For a lot of people, the betrayal isn't that America has problems. Every country does. The betrayal is feeling like the promises expired, but the marketing didn't. And once that illusion breaks, you start asking, okay, so where could my life actually make sense? Let's look at reason number 4. People want time, not just things. Um, this one hits deep. Most people aren't leaving because they want more stuff. They're leaving because they want more time. The US is normal to work 40 or 60 hours a week, spend 1 to 2 hours commuting, squeeze your whole life into nights and weekends. You earn vacation while you're scared to take it. You're on call mentally, even off the clock. But abroad, people start seeing life, they start seeing another life. 4-day work weeks in some places, 30 plus days of vacation as standard, long lunches, actual family time, evenings that aren't just recovery. The real reason people leave is they realize my life is not just about paying bills until I die. I want to actually experience living. They're not chasing luxury, they're chasing time and freedom. And in many countries, that's baked into the culture. Okay? Here's another reason. Safety means more than strong military. Ask most Americans what makes the US safe. They'll talk about the military, the police, the economy, right? But people who are leaving, they're asking a different set of questions. Do I feel safe sending my kid to school? Do I feel safe in public spaces? Do I feel safe as a Black person, as an immigrant? Do I feel safe if I lose my job unexpectedly? Safety isn't just, can my country win a war? Safety is, will the system protect me or chew me up and spit me out? A lot of folks are moving to countries that may not have the biggest militaries, but they have lower crime rates in daily life, less gun violence, better social safety nets, more predictable access to healthcare. People leave when they realize I might actually be safer living a quieter life abroad than constantly being on edge in a powerful country. Here's my next point. They want a different story for their kids. So if you don't have kids, it still applies to your future self. For a lot of parents and honestly, future parents, the question becomes, what kind of baseline life will my kids have here? Will they become stressed about debt at 18? Will they grow up with active shooter drills? Inherit a planet that's burning with no plan? Have to work 2 jobs just to survive? You know, People leave because they want their kids to grow up. seeing the world, not just hearing about it, learning languages and experiencing cultures where life isn't always just about work, 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 feeling safe, walking outside. They're trying not to create a perfect childhood. They're trying to avoid a predictability, a stressful one. So sometimes the real reason people move abroad, it's simple. I want my kids' starting line to be different than mine was. And let's look at my next point. Once you see options, you can't go back. Here's the part nobody tells you. People don't just leave the US for another country, they leave for a new perspective. The first time you live abroad, even if it's for a few months, you realize like not everyone is obsessed with work. Not everyone, not every place worships the dollar above all. Not every government lets you drown in medical debt. Not every culture is constant, argument mode. And then this sneaky little question creeps in. If life can feel like this here, then why am I tolerating that over there? That's a real question. People don't just travel, they relocate. Once you know there are multiple ways to live, the idea of staying in a situation that drains you starts to feel less like loyalty and more like self-sabotage. So, should you leave the US? Let me be clear. I'm not here to tell you, pack your bags tomorrow and never look back. Leaving the US isn't a flex, it's a morale badge. It's just a different choice. But if you've been feeling burnt out, overpriced, underseen, and quietly thinking there has to be another way to live, well, then maybe this is the video. This video is your permission to at least explore that thought seriously with questions like, do I actually want my day-to-day life to feel like this? What would I do with more time and less stress? Which matters most to me right now, status or peace? Because at the end of the day, you don't get a bonus for suffering in one location. So if this hits home for you, do two things. Drop a comment. What's the number one reason why you want to leave the United States? Is it money, stress, safety, or future? I want to see that where your head is. Number two, I've got a lot of other videos, man. Check out my other videos talking about strategies of how you could live abroad and build a life that's sustainable. Yep. So make sure you're subscribed if you're not. I'm Expat D, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.